Right. Hi, I'm Nicole Athearn. I'm the coordinator for the Great Plains Landscape Conservation Cooperative. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. I went to the University of California, Davis for my undergraduate degree. Wanted to be a veterinarian. Went there because they have a vet school there, and clearly I'm not a veterinarian. I spent some time there. I went to a summer course in the Yellowstone ecosystem about endangered species and learned about natural resource management agencies, spent some time in the backcountry, got very excited about, I always loved animals, but it wasn't just about animals for me. It was seeing them in their natural environment and their natural element. It became something where my love for animals translated from wanting to work on them specifically to wanting to protect the areas where they could live on their own terms. And so that's what really drove me to the field of wildlife conservation. I came to Oklahoma after I got my bachelor's degree because I joined the Student Conservation Association. Even though I knew I loved animals and wildlife and plants, I didn't know what I wanted to do with that degree. So I joined this conservation association so that I could volunteer and learn a little bit about the different kinds of work that could be done in this field. And they sent me to the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge. And so it was there that I came to really appreciate the ecology of the Great Plains, and that is what really drove me back here ultimately, I think. I got my master's in wildlife ecology from Oklahoma State University, Stillwater, and I learned about that, high-tech DOS prompt, GIS thing. And so I got a GIS certificate there at Oklahoma State University, and then I went to work for the U.S. Geological Survey back in California. So that's where I worked on wetland restoration and water bird ecology. I went back to Davis. I got my doctorate in ecology. I did stochastic simulation modeling for water bird habitat in order to inform management. And I got very interested in this interface between management and science and how science can be used to inform smarter management decisions. And so that's really ultimately what led me to take this job here back in February and to learn about ways that I could influence or help to play a part in cooperative conservation. So that's why I'm here today. That's my background. I'm going to talk, we've heard a little bit today already about climate science centers and landscape conservation cooperatives. And we're going to take a little bit of a step back and look at the bigger picture with respect to natural resource management and the cooperative science behind enabling natural resource management decision making. So why do we care about the impacts of climate change on our environment? Well, clearly, healthy ecosystem drives so much of the things that we care about. It's everything. It's the water we drink. We don't breathe water. The water we drink. It's the air we breathe. It's our natural resources support our economy. We need a healthy environment in order to support a healthy economy in the long term. We need reliable food production. We enjoy knowing that there are natural areas out there. We enjoy going out and seeing them. We enjoy recreating in them. And we have, many of us, a spiritual connection to the land as well, and cultural connection to our past. And so this is something that we all care very deeply about, whether we think about it explicitly or not. There's a connection to the landscape there. But as Bill, I think, did a really good job of talking about all of the challenges to natural resource management. Not even considering climate change yet, just that there has been such an increase in the human population, an increase in the demand for natural resources, and things that have come out of this have been land use changes, habitat fragmentation, invasive species. There has been already a large decline in biodiversity across the world. And so this is something that's already been stressed. And climate change just exacerbates those potential stressors. So while we were already concerned, or we're already concerned now about the availability of water for all the different needs on the landscape, and human needs and wildlife and ecosystem needs, the uncertainty in the future of water availability just threatens to exacerbate that more. Changing temperatures, phenological shifts, that means changes in the timing that things occur, changes in the timing of plant pollination, etc., changes in migration patterns, migration timing, and extreme weather events at sea level rise. And so this is something that presents a challenge for natural resource management of all kinds. And the biggest challenge that we face is uncertainty. That's the biggest challenge, because if we really knew exactly what was going to happen, we could plan for it specifically. But we don't know what's going to happen. We have to manage in the face of uncertainty. And the problem with that, of course, is that we only have so much time to act before further changes happen. And we have very limited conservation dollars, very limited dollars for research. And so what we really need to do at this point is to work together. So there is a hope here in that if we work together, we can tackle things, we can think about what the uncertainties might be, and we can prepare for them. But we need to do that in a way that we don't duplicate any efforts, because that would be inefficient, and in a way that's smart for what are the decisions that we actually need to make, and how can we find the information that we need to make it in a timely manner. And so this is where collaborative science is important. It's basically, this is our hope for the future, that we can work together and develop science that can inform our management decisions now, that can help us deal with these changes in the future. And so you've heard a few of these referred to already. Actually, you've heard them all referred to already. You've heard a lot about climate science centers and landscape conservation cooperatives. And briefly, the speakers have mentioned U.S. Department of Agriculture Climate Hubs and the NOAA Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessments, the RESAs. And so we're just going to touch really briefly on the big picture view of what all of these four groups do together to help us deal with the uncertainties around climate change and natural resource management. So in order for these partnerships to be effective, each of these partnerships has these kinds of traits, and you especially heard from Bill about the inner workings of a landscape conservation cooperative. There's a dedicated staff. They have coordinators or directors. They share a common agenda or vision. So they have a common focus. For the landscape conservation cooperatives, that's landscape scale conservation. For the climate centers, that's developing climate tools to support the end user needs. And they have a shared measurement of success. They communicate among themselves to avoid duplication of effort and make sure that the needs that are out there are being met. And they practice mutually reinforcing activities. And what this means essentially is just no duplication of effort. And the goal is to everybody fills a role, everybody's working efficiently, and the work that is done by one partner supports the work that's done by another. But the partnerships themselves comprise a network. So the partnerships themselves, the LCCs, the CSCs, the RESAs, the USDA Climate Hubs, they are a network to support science development and application for the country, for natural resources in general. I'm going to talk a little bit about those in more detail. So you've heard already quite a bit about the climate science centers and the landscape conservation cooperatives. You've seen these maps before. This is my schematic of kind of the view that I have on how these two things work together. And you've already heard this, but there's a little bit of a continuum from the pure science, the science and research that's being developed, and then the application of that science on the ground. And so the communication that's needed between the landscape conservation cooperative and the climate science center is about what are the needs from the field? What are the end user needs from the natural resource managers and the conservation decision makers? That each, I think somebody mentioned, I think it was Allison, that if you have if you ask a refuge manager what it is that they need, they'll tell you what they need for that small piece of land that they manage. But what the Atlantic Conservation Cooperatives can do is bring together the needs of different individual partners and synthesize them and prioritize them into, here are the things that we need on a large scale that we need in order to make management decisions at a landscape scale. And that's the kind of information that the Atlantic Conservation Cooperatives can provide to the Climate Science Center. And then the Climate Science Centers are able to provide these science products that can then be disseminated out to the end users. So both the Landscape Conservation Cooperative and the Climate Science Centers are working with scientists that this climate science is coming through the Climate Science Centers. And there are ecologists and biologists that we in the LCCs work with as well. And there are also ecologists and biologists that work with Climate Science Centers. So there is this integrated network of science and science communication that fulfills a niche in the area of landscape scale conservation. But there are other partnerships that are also focused on natural resource management, and those are the USDA climate hubs and NOAA RESAs. So the climate hubs are regional hubs for risk adaptation and mitigation to climate change. There's 7 of them, and you can see their location around the country. And if you look at the previous slides, notice that the boundaries are a little different for all of these agencies. But the climate hubs have the same basic areas. There's a little bit of overlap. There's a little more, these projects have this fuzzy boundary thing going on in the Climate Science Centers that help the groups to have integration among one another so that what we form is actually a seamless network. But the difference between the climate hubs and the other ones that you've heard about so far is that these groups are focused on agricultural issues. So they're focused on the effects of climate change for agricultural production and for rural economic development. And so their role is really to serve the end users in that community and deliver the kind of climate information to farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners that can help them to understand the potential changes that may occur in the work that they do due to climate change and respond to it appropriately. The NOAA RESAs are regional integrated sciences and assessments. There's 11 of these. They're also distributed around the country. And they're, these more specific projects that are being developed. And there's 11 of these projects so far. And they work to conduct scenario planning and participatory assessment. So the emphasis of the NOAA RESAs is not specifically on wildlife adaptation or plant adaptation. It's on supporting the kind of science that supports policy decision. And so they call that, the translation of science into actionable knowledge. So this is the kind of thing that is about, what are the risks to human populations associated with increased fire or flooding. That's the kind of information that the NOAA RESAs are providing, which is really useful for integrating in along with the other information that we get. So this is a revised version of that other figure. If you include the NOAA RESAs in the science gathering arm and working with more of the physical scientists and agricultural scientists that deal with adaptation planning, scenario assessment, then you can also look to the USDA climate hubs as dealing with the end users and farmers, ranchers, and foresters, and the NOAA RESAs will be dealing with policymakers. Now I have this figure because this is a paper by Peter Kriva and Michelle Marvier from a couple of years ago called What is Conservation Science? And it was intended to be a response to a seminal paper that was written about what is conservation biology. And its response was mainly about, there's conservation biology at the top there, but really we need to consider all of these different aspects of science. And some of these things we don't traditionally think of as hardcore science, like sociology, psychology, communication, anthropology, economics. But these things are really important in terms of being able to affect lasting and meaningful change on our entire population. And if conservation science is to be effective, then all of these things must be considered. You can't ignore any one of them in order to accomplish these things. And I would argue that climate adaptation is similar. We have to consider all of these different things in climate adaptation, including agriculture, economics, conservation biology, climate science, public health, all of these things that play a role. And I think it's this integration of all of these different components of who we are and the kinds of things that we care about in this country that make partnerships so important and effective for dealing with this particular challenge before us that we've never faced before. And so this is the way that I believe we'll be able to deal with climate change in the future. And shed some light on the uncertainties that currently plague us. So, thank you.